Good morning or good afternoon or whenever you're listening to this, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. We're going to talk through chapter 18 of The Giver today. Just an encouragement to keep watching the video each day. I know many of you either have finished the book or are a little bit ahead of us, but encouragement to keep watching anyways, because while we read the chapters, even if you've read them once before, we talk through some things as we read, and some things that obviously you'd miss out on if you aren't listening to the video. One example of that would be yesterday's video. One of the questions said, what was Jonas struggling with as the other kids were playing the war game? And in the video, we paused and stopped and talked about how what Jonas was really experiencing was post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. That's something that a lot of soldiers struggle with when they return back from war. They have all these bad memories of awful things they saw, or people dying, and little things like seeing kids play war games, or watching a violent movie, or seeing fireworks even, and hearing the booming and the banging can make them have these bad memories and just really stress out. And that's what Jonas was going through, because he had a memory of war, right? And as he saw these other kids playing a game, we talked about in the video for yesterday that he really kind of suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. He just freaked out because he just gave him all these bad memories. So I noticed on some of our answers on our sheet, we weren't, even though I even said, hey, this is going to be this is what Jonas is struggling with. I noticed some of us didn't quite have that, so I'm wondering if we maybe skipped that part of the video. Just an encouragement to keep watching the full videos. I'll try to keep them as short and sweet as I can. But even if you've read a book before, like I've read this book 5-6 times, I think, at least in my life, even rereading sections can help you catch stuff, and to chat about it with other people that you haven't read the book with before is also something that can add their perspectives. And I know we can't chat about them and together right now, but at least you can hear my thoughts on it and compare that to how you feel about different sections of the book too. So our first word is permeated. If you've got the white book, permeated you'll find on page 164. For the rest of us, it's on 131. Permeated is the first sentence of the first real paragraph. Really, this is kind of the second paragraph. It says, and his new heightened feelings permeated a greater realm than simply his sleep. So he's getting all these new feelings from all these memories that he's been given, right? He understands what love is, for instance. He understands the beauty of a rainbow in colors. And he noticed these feelings not only being just in his sleep and his dreams, but his whole life. So permeated means filled up. Okay, and so he was being filled up with all these different memories and feelings. Going to 133. 133. If you have the white book, it's going to be in 167. We're looking for the word suppressing. So here's the kids playing their war game. 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs from the bottom, the one that starts from the opposite side of the field. Okay, they're playing this war game, and then they're dropping down, pretending to be dead. And it says the last sentence of the fourth paragraph from the bottom says, they dropped to the ground and lay suppressing giggles. So they're supposed to be dead, right? They're not supposed to be making any noises. But it's a silly game to them, right? So they're laughing, but they're trying not to because they're supposed to be quiet and dead on the ground. So that's literally what suppressing means. Suppressing means holding in or trying to stop. So these kids are just having fun and playing this game. They don't understand what it's really about, like Jonas does, right? And so while they're supposed to be dead on the ground, they're laughing because they're having fun, and they're trying to hold in or trying to stop their giggles because they're supposed to be being quiet, right? Imploringly, 142. So if you've got the white book, that'll be on 178. Second to last paragraph on 142. I'll read the whole thing. I had to, Jonas. It was my job. And she had been chosen. The giver looked at him imploringly. Jonas stroked his hand. So this is the part where Jonas asks him what happened to the other receiver that failed, right? Rosemary. We'll talk more about her when we get to the questions of the book. Jonas asked the giver why she had failed, and almost it seemed, I think, to the giver that Jonas was maybe blaming him for giving her these bad memories, because that's really what caused her to kind of lose her mind, right, and eventually asked to be released. But the giver says, I had to, Jonas. It was her job. That's what I was supposed to do. He looked at Jonas imploringly. And so what does that mean, that he looked at him imploringly? Literally, the word means desperately, or to make an appeal. If you're trying to convince someone that you really did the right thing, come on, that was the best choice I had, right? Or maybe you missed the winning shot in a basketball game. You might say to your friends, well, I was from half court. You're begging them to see that you did the right thing. You're desperate, or you're making an appeal saying, I really did the right thing, please understand, right? This is the only choice I had, right? And maybe you've done that before too. When my kids get upset about the cereal being gone in the morning, there's usually a cereal that they all want to eat. Lately it was Cinnamon Toast Crunch, which is a good cereal, by the way. And there was only a tiny bit left in the box, so my first child up, Mason, ate the rest of it. And the other kids got up and they were all mad, and I had to say to them imploringly, I had to make an appeal to them. Well, there was only a tiny bit left, guys. Mason was the first up. I let him have it. And so that's imploringly, to explain something in a desperate way, wanting somebody to see your side, to make an appeal to them, okay? So that's imploring. That's what the giver was doing. He's saying, Jonas, you got to understand. That's the job. I know you're maybe mad at me that she failed, or maybe the rest of the community's mad at me, but I was only doing my job. All right, let's talk about what happened in chapter 18. It says, what did Jonas ask the giver about as the chapter began? What did the giver admit about this thing? So Jonas asked him, do you ever think about being released? And the giver had to say, yeah, I think about it sometimes. He had to admit that, right? What was the name of the receiver who had failed before Jonas, and what had caused her to begin having trouble? So her name was Rosemary, right? And what caused her to start having troubles, it was when the giver began to give her some difficult memories. Now, he held off things like war, but he gave her memories of loss and being abandoned and really awful, emotional memories that are hard to deal with. And she couldn't deal with that. It caused her to go crazy, right? Number 3, what did this receiver request to have done, and what happened to the memories she had already been given? So she requested to be released. That wasn't in her rules. They didn't have that for her at that time. They added those to Jonas' rules this time around, and they had to release her. And so what happened to the memories? They were lost. In fact, they went back to the people, and the people freaked out because all of a sudden they had these bad memories that they had never had before. And so that was a bad thing, right? So what did Jonas ask the giver about on 143? I apologize, I didn't have the page number in there right away, but hopefully you figured that was page 180, White Book people. He asked, what would happen if I fell into the river and died or something, right? And so what would happen if that took place? The giver responded that all the memories would go back to the people, and they wouldn't know how to handle all this pain and bad things, right? Number 5, what did the giver seem to be wondering about as the chapter came to an end? How did this seem to make the giver feel? The giver was like, but if you suddenly went away somehow, I guess I could maybe help out the people deal with these memories. And so you can see that Jonas and the giver are both kind of thinking what would happen if Jonas just went away or disappeared or even died? Maybe we could change things if somehow that took place, right? You can see the giver's thinking about that, but it's making him really troubled. You can tell, he's got this faraway look in his eye at the end of chapter 18. The giver seems to be bothered by some of the questions that Jonas is asking, and I guess I hadn't thought about that too much. And Jonas certainly seems to also be wondering, how is this fair? Is there any way we can change this? And so you can see Jonas's point of view. We've been talking about points of view this whole book, right? Seems to be that maybe there's a way we can change this. Maybe if I go away, or maybe if I die. And the giver's wondering too, maybe this would be better, or maybe, I don't know. And the giver's really troubled, though. He's having some troubled thoughts about it. All right, we're not going to talk about a reading skill today because I want to save you more time to do your practicing in Quizlet today. So you see my picture of Quizlet I have up here. I'm going to have you do a multiple choice test again because that's the way the test is going to be. We're almost to the end of the book. Take a look at your book. We only got a little chunk left, right? So one of your step 3 part of your assignment today is going to be to take another practice test. Now, I noticed the other day, Friday, when you guys did this, that we had some fairly low scores. I saw some 50%, some 40%. Certainly I saw some higher scores too. But what makes me a little nervous is we're getting closer to the test. There's not much of our book left. We're going to be taking this test. I'd have to look at my plans again, but very soon, either the end of this week or early next week. So I want you, if you don't score very well, to really take a lot of time to review those words that you missed. I'm going to make this video purposely shorter today, so you have more time to do that, okay? Practice, 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 and drill, drill, drill those words that you missed because that test is coming, and I want that test to go well for you, okay? That's the reason I'm having you practice these words each day, so you can figure out, okay, which ones do I know, and which vocab words do I need to practice a little bit more so I can do well on that test, okay? So I really want you to take your time today and really drill any words you missed and look them over and find out what the correct meaning is, okay? So just my challenge to you today, because that test is coming up before. Otherwise, let's read together chapter 19. It's a fairly short one today. And I'm going to do my best. One of the reading skills we also talked about was reading with expression. So I'm going to do my best here in chapter 19 to read with expression. And remember, an assignment you'll eventually get in this book is you're going to pick a spot in the book and read with expression. Change the sound of your voice and make it sound excited or sad or make it sound like those characters to really bring out the story and help yourself understand it, okay? So I'll do my best to do that again today. You let me know how I do. Chapter 19, page 146 in the Black Book, and in White Book, people, you'll be able to find that, I'm sure. Here we go. Jonas glanced at the clock. There was so much work to be done, always, that he and the giver seldom simply sat and talked the way they just had. I'm sorry I wasted that so much time with my question, Jonas said. I was only thinking about release because my father is releasing a new child today, a twin. He has to select one and release the other one. They do it by weight. Jonas glanced at the clock. Actually, I suppose he's already finished. I think it was this morning. The giver's face took on a solemn look. I wish they wouldn't do that, he said quietly, almost to himself. Well, there can't be two identical people around. Think of how confusing that would be, Jonas chuckled. I wish I could watch, he added as an afterthought. He liked the thought of seeing his father perform the ceremony and making the little twin clean and comfy. His father was such a gentle man. You can watch, the giver said. No, Jonas told him. They never let children watch. It's very private. Jonas, the giver told him, I know that you read your training instructions very carefully. Don't you remember that you're allowed to ask anyone anything? Top of 147. Yes, Jonas nodded. Yes, but Jonas, when you and I have finished our time together, you will be the new receiver. You can read the books. You'll have the memories. You have access to everything. It's part of your training. If you want to watch a release, you simply have to ask. Jonas shrugged. Well, maybe I will then. But it's too late for this one. I'm sure it was this morning. The giver told him then something he had not known. All private ceremonies are recorded. They're in the Hall of Closed Records. Do you want to see this morning's release? Jonas hesitated. He was afraid that his father wouldn't like it if he watched something so private. I think you should, the giver told him firmly. Well, all right then, Jonas said. Tell me how. The giver rose from his chair, went to the speaker on the wall, and clicked the switch from off to on. The voice spoke immediately. Yes, receiver? How may I help you? I would like to see this morning's release of the twin. One moment, receiver. Thank you for your instructions. Jonas watched the video screen above the row of switches. Its blank face began to flicker with zigzag lines. Then some numbers appeared, followed by the date and time. He was astonished and delighted that this was available to him, and surprised that he had not known. Suddenly, he could see a small windowless room, empty except for a bed, a table with some equipment on it. Jonas recognized a scale. He had seen them before when he'd been volunteering hours at the nurturing center, top of 148, and a cupboard. He could see pale carpeting on the floor. It was just an ordinary room, he commented. I thought they'd maybe have it in the auditorium so that everybody could come. All the old go to the ceremonies of release, but I suppose when it's just a newborn, they don't. Shh, the giver said, his eyes on the screen. Jonas's father, wearing his nurturing uniform, entered the room, cradling a tiny new child wrapped in a soft blanket in his arms. A uniformed woman followed through the door, carrying a second new child wrapped in a similar blanket. That's my father, Jonas found himself whispering, as if he might wake the little ones if he spoke aloud. And the other nurturer is his assistant. She's still in training, but she'll be finished soon. The two nurturers unwrapped the blankets and laid the identical newborns on the bed. They were naked. Jonas could see that they were males. He watched, fascinated, as his father gently lifted one and then the other to the scale and weighed them. He heard his father laugh. Good, his father said to the woman. I thought for a moment that they might be both exactly the same. Then we'd have a problem. But this one, he handed one after rewrapping it to his assistant, is 6 pounds even. So you can clean him up and dress him and take him over to the center. The woman took the new child and left through the door she had entered. Jonas watched as his father bent over the squirming new child on the bed. And you, little guy, you're only 5 pounds 10 ounces, a shrimp. That's the special voice he uses with Gabriel, Jonas remarked, smiling. Watch, the giver said. Now he cleans up and makes him comfy, Jonas told him. He told me. Be quiet, Jonas, the giver commanded in a strange voice. Watch. Obediently, Jonas concentrated on the screen, waiting for what would happen next. He was especially curious about the ceremony part. His father turned and opened the cupboard. He took out a syringe. It's like a big needle, like a shot, right? And a small bottle. Very carefully, he inserted the needle into the bottle and began to fill the syringe with a clear liquid. Jonas winced sympathetically. He had forgotten that new children had to get shots. He hated shots himself, though he knew that they were necessary. To his surprise, his father began very carefully to direct the needle into the top of the new child's forehead, puncturing the place where the fragile skin pulsed. The newborn squirmed and wailed faintly. Why is he? Shh, the giver said sharply. His father was talking, and Jonas realized that he was hearing the answer to the question he had started to ask. Still in the special voice, his father was saying, I know, it hurts, little guy, but I have to use a vein, and the veins in your arms are still too teeny-weeny. He pushed the plunger very slowly, injecting the liquid into the scalp vein until the syringe was empty. All done. That wasn't so bad, was it? Jonas heard his father say cheerfully. He turned aside and dropped the syringe into a waste receptacle. Now he cleans him up and makes him comfy, Jonas said to himself, aware that the giver didn't want to talk during the little ceremony. As he continued to watch, the new child, no longer crying, moved his arms and legs in a jerking motion. Then he went limp. Limp means like completely still. His head fell to the side, his eyes half open. Then he was still. With an odd, shocked feeling, Jonas recognized the gestures and posture and expression. They were familiar. He'd seen them before, but he couldn't remember where. Jonas stared at the screen, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The little twin lay motionless. His father was putting things away, folding the blanket, closing the cupboard. Once again, as he had on the playing field, he felt the choking sensation. Once again, he saw the face of the light-haired, bloodied soldier as life left his eyes. The memory came back. He killed it! My father killed it! Jonas said to himself, stunned at what he was realizing. He continued to stare at the screen numbly. His father tidied the room. Then he picked up a small carton that lay waiting on the floor, set it on the bed, and lifted the limp body into it. He placed the lid on tightly. He picked up the carton and carried it to the other side of the room. He opened a small door in the wall. Jonas could see the darkness behind the door. It seemed to be the same sort of chute into which trash was deposited at school. His father loaded the carton containing the body in the chute and gave it a shove. Bye-bye, little guy, Jonas heard his father say before he left the room. Then the screen went blank. I want you to pause in your reading there for just a second. Let's talk about what happened. So you can see we're getting to like a really interesting, exciting, exciting, right? Exciting in a bad way, like in a movie where the good guy meets the bad guy, right? Part of our book. You can see that what release now means. You know, remember throughout the whole book we've been told that old people get released and twins get released. Did you just find out from this section what release means? Release means they kill them, right? They put them to death. They give them a shot that stops their heart and kills them. And so notice what happened to this twin that was too small. They gave it, Jonas's dad gave it a shot, and the baby died. That might be very similar to what we would call abortion today, right? The word abortion means to kill a baby. Usually a baby's killed when it's still in a mother's stomach. That's a horrible thing. That's murder, right, in God's eyes? And yet in our country, in the United States, that's legal. If a mother doesn't want a baby, before that baby's born, she can have it killed. Now, it is illegal in our country to kill babies after they're born, okay? But isn't that really sad? What happens? That Jonas is shocked because he's found out what release literally means. Release literally means that someone's put to death. And before this, he had no idea. In fact, no one really knows. They always do it in a different room or secretly, like Jonas's father did here. Now, does Jonas's father truly understand what release and death is either? I don't know. Probably not fully, right? Because he hasn't had memories of death and things like Jonas has had, like with his war memories. But at the same time, Jonas is also realizing that his father's been lying to him, right? Jonas's father says he makes them comfortable and all of this, right, when babies are released. But notice what they did. Isn't this awful? Not only was the baby put to death with this shot, but then they just kind of threw it into a trash bin. Isn't that horrible? Just an awful, awful, awful thing. As awful as abortion is today, that people take the deaths of little babies, take the lives of little babies before they're ever born. And that's a terrible thing in God's eyes, and that's very sad. So this is kind of a sad part of the book too. But we're getting close to the climax of the story. Remember, the climax of the story is like the most exciting part. We're like, oh no, what's going to happen now, right? So how do you think Jonas is going to react to this now that he knows this is going on? He was already upset about the way the community was run, and now he finds out that release really means death, put to death, like with a shot. We'll see how Jonas reacts to this. But you can see we're getting close to that really, really exciting part of the story where, wow, this could go any direction. What's going to happen, right? And so what a terrible thing for Jonas to realize and see. The giver turned to him. So I'm on 151 if you're in the Black Book. Quite calmly, he related, when the speaker notified me that Rosemary had applied for release, they turned on the tape to show me the process. There she was, my last glimpse of that beautiful child waiting. They brought in the syringe, the shot, and asked her to roll up her sleeve. You suggested, Jonas, that perhaps she wasn't brave enough? I don't know about bravery, what it is or what it means. I do know that I sat here numb with horror, wretched with helplessness as I listened as Rosemary told them that she would prefer to inject herself. Then she did, so I didn't watch. I looked away. The giver turned to him. Well, there you are, Jonas. You were wondering about her release, he said in a bitter voice. So notice, before I read that last line, I do want to give you your code words. There's another sin that happens in this section too. God's word calls abortion a sin. To take the life of anybody, even an unborn child, God's word calls a sin. The Bible does, right? God calls murder sin. And unfortunately, a lot of people in our country don't see it that way. That's really sad. Here's another sin. Rosemary took her own life. We call that suicide, right? And in God's word, God also warns us against taking any lives, even our own. Suicide is a sin too, that God doesn't want us to commit. But that's what Rosemary did, because she was so distraught with the memories that she got. She finally took her own life by doing the shot herself. So our code word for today is abortion. It's a sad one. Not a funny, goofy one today, but a sad word. Because that's a sad word that our government and our country thinks is okay right now. Many, many people do have abortions every year. In fact, millions of babies around the world lose their lives before they're ever born. What a sad thing. And so I'm sorry that's a sad word today, but I just wanted to talk about that because this chapter touches on that too, that the babies that aren't big enough or that are twins are aborted. And you can think of the old people too. The old people, when they're released, they think they're going off somewhere great or to another city, but they're really just killed with a shot. Really sad. So abortion is our code word today. Here's our last paragraph, very short. Jonas felt a ripping sensation inside himself, the feeling of terrible pain clawing its way forward to emerge in a cry. So Jonas just bursts out in a cry. He can't believe what he's seen. And you can see why we're at the climax of the book, right? We're at like the most exciting part. What's Jonas going to do now? Like when he goes home and sees his dad. Or what's Jonas going to do? He thought it was bad before how the community treated people. Now what does he think, right? And so we'll see. You guys are going to get to read a little further ahead to chapter 20. You're going to find out what happens next. Hopefully you're on the edge of your seat if you haven't read that yet. And if you have, you know this is kind of the tipping point of the book, right? Have a good rest of your day, guys.